The snow was falling softly over the ruins of Kresnik, a once beautiful mountain village in Eastern Europe. Now only rubble remained, blackened chimneys, collapsed roofs, and frozen silence. Lieutenant Mark Hensley of the 41st Infantry Division stood in the square, reading a crumpled note in his gloved hand. Hold the village. Reinforcements arriving in 48 hours. Do not retreat. He folded the message and looked around at the 18 soldiers under his command, young, exhausted, and scared. Among them was Private Sam Carter, just 18, who carried a photo of his dog in his helmet. Corporal Elena Petrova, a Russian scout with eyes sharp as broken glass, stood guard near a broken wall. And then there was Sergeant Joe Maddox, a veteran with a growl for a voice and no time for small talk. That night, the wind howled through shattered windows. Mark sat near a crumbling fireplace, rereading a letter from his younger sister Emma. "Mark, I miss you." Dad cried in the barn. "Come home soon. I built a snowman I want to show you." He tucked it back into his coat. The war had made home feel like another world. Nearby, Sam stared out a window. "Think we'll make it?" he asked. Mark looked at the boy and forced a smile. "We'll try." The next morning, an explosion ripped through the silence. Mortar shells rained down, and enemy troops appeared through the fog. Mark shouted orders over the chaos. "Elena, flank left. Joe, get the MG up." The battle was fierce. Waves of soldiers rushed them, and the defenders pushed back with everything they had. Grenades, rifles, even hand-to-hand combat. It wasn't war anymore. It was survival. By noon, 3 of Mark's men were dead, including Sam. Mark found him near the well, lifeless in the snow, the dog photo still in his helmet. He picked it up, heart heavy. "I'm sorry, Sam." By nightfall, only 10 remained. "They'll return," Elena warned, blood staining her side. "We hold until dawn," Mark said, voice firm. Joe grunted. "Then we die with the sun." "No," Mark replied. "We live to see it." That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He wrote a letter by candlelight. "If you find this, know we fought not for medals, but because someone had to hold the line. Today it was us. Tomorrow, it might be you." He placed it inside Sam's helmet beside the fireplace. At dawn, the final assault came. Explosions shook the earth. Tanks rolled in. Elena was hit by a sniper. Joe held the tower until his ammo ran dry, then used a grenade to take out the last wave climbing the stairs. Mark, wounded and alone, retreated into the church. Blood soaked his leg. Smoke filled the air. He gripped his pistol and waited behind the altar. But the bullet didn't come. He woke in a medical tent. "You're lucky," the nurse said. Reinforcements arrived just in time. On the table beside him was Sam's helmet. Inside it, his letter and the dog photo. A note was taped to it. "We found this in the church. It deserves to be read." Months later, Mark stood at a memorial in Washington, reading that letter aloud. "We fought not for glory, but because someone had to stand in the way." In the crowd, a young girl asked her mother, "Is he a hero?" Her mother nodded. "Yes." But so were the ones who didn't come back. The village of Kresnik was never rebuilt. But if you stand there in the snow, you might still hear whispers of Mark, of Sam, of all who held the line. His orders were clear. Hold the village. Reinforcements arriving in 48 hours. Do not retreat. Lieutenant Mark Hensley read the message again, though he already knew it by heart. The ink had run, probably smeared by the cold, wet hands of the exhausted courier who had delivered it hours earlier. But the message was unmistakable. This place, this shell of a village, was where they were to make their stand. Kresnik was its name, a forgotten village deep in the Eastern European mountains. Once peaceful, it now stood in ruins. Crumbled homes, scorched trees, and empty windows stared like the hollow eyes of ghosts. The snow had begun to fall again, soft but steady, covering the destruction in a quiet, deceptive calm. Mark, just 27, was now the highest-ranking officer left. He had 18 soldiers under his command, what was left of an infantry unit that had been overrun, bombed, scattered, and nearly broken. They were tired, hungry, and more than anything, they were scared. Among them was Private Sam Carter, a wide-eyed recruit barely 18. He still kept a photograph of his golden retriever tucked inside his helmet, a reminder of a simpler world far from war. His hands trembled when he held his rifle, but he never complained. Then there was Corporal Elena Petrova, a sharp-eyed Russian scout. She had grown up in war, and it had carved something cold and focused into her soul. She moved like a shadow, always watching, never wasting a word. Mark respected her, maybe feared her a little too. And finally, Sergeant Joe Maddox, a man molded by 3 tours and too many battles. Grizzled, grim, and always cleaning his rifle, Joe hardly spoke unless it mattered. When he did, his voice carried the weight of every friend he'd buried. The rest of the squad were a mix of young soldiers and war-hardened remnants. Most had stopped dreaming of going home. Now, the mission was all that kept them together. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Mark walked the perimeter. He saw men fortifying broken buildings with sandbags and crates. Others took watch from shattered rooftops, eyes scanning the tree line. They all knew the enemy was close. Night fell, and the village became a silhouette of shadows and snow. Mark sat in what had once been a tavern. Now it was their temporary command post, for walls and a roof, more than most places had. He lit a small fire in the corner, more for morale than warmth. Private Sam approached, helmet in hand. "So you think they'll really come? Reinforcements?" Mark hesitated, then nodded. "That's what they said. We just need to hold." Sam sat down, staring into the fire. He pulled out the dog photo and smiled. "His name's Benny. He sleeps under my bed every night. Or used to." Mark forced a smile. "What made you join, Sam?" "Honestly, I wanted to be someone. Not just the kid who bagged groceries in Vermont." Mark looked at him. "You already are someone. You're here." Sam nodded, eyes flickering with something between pride and fear. Outside, a cold wind howled through the trees. The men braced themselves in silence. At dawn, a distant sound rumbled over the hills. Tanks. Then artillery. The sky lit up with fire. Shells crashed into buildings. Shouts echoed through the rubble. The enemy had arrived. Mark shouted orders as chaos erupted. "Petrova, left flank. Maddox, cover the church tower." The soldiers moved with trained desperation. Bullets tore through the walls. Smoke and snow filled the air. Screams rang out. Sam was crouched behind a stone wall, firing blindly. Mark saw him reload, then stand up too quickly. A shot cracked. Sam dropped. Mark rushed to him, dragging his body behind cover. The photo of Benny slipped from the helmet, landing in the snow, red blooming around it. "Stay with me, Sam," Mark cried. But Sam was already gone. The fighting lasted for hours. The soldiers held every street, every wall, every breath. By night, only a handful remained. Elena was hit in the shoulder, Maddox had taken shrapnel to the leg, and Mark himself was wounded, but they were still alive. "They'll hit us again," Maddox said, breathing hard. "We won't last another wave." Mark looked at what was left of his unit. Broken, bloodied, but not defeated. "We hold until dawn," he said. "And then what?" Elena asked. "Then we see the sun. Together." At first light, the final attack came. Mark manned a barricade with his last magazine. When it ran dry, he pulled his sidearm. Explosions shook the ground, and the enemy advanced like a flood. Just as the last line was about to break, a thunder cracked from the east. Reinforcements. Tanks rolled in behind the enemy. Planes screamed overhead. The tide turned. Kresnik was saved. Mark sat in a hospital 10 days later, his leg in a cast. On the table beside him was Sam's helmet, and inside it, the dog photo. Someone had slipped a note inside. He held the line. "You all did. And that's why we're alive." Mark closed his eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Sam." Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft, silent, and free. That night, Mark sat by the remains of a fireplace with only glowing embers to warm him. The cold bit into his bones, But worse than the cold was the silence. The kind of silence that made a man hear voices from his past. He took out a worn letter from his pocket. It was from his younger sister, Emma, back home in New Hampshire. "Mark, I miss you. Every time the mail truck comes, I run out hoping for news. Mom still sets a plate for you at dinner, and Dad, well, he pretends to be strong. But I saw him crying in the barn. Please come home soon. I want to show you the snowman I made." He had read it 100 times. Every word carved itself into his heart deeper than the last. But here, in Kresnik, the idea of home felt like a fairy tale. Suddenly, a sound broke through the silence, a cough. He turned. Sam Carter was sitting near the window, watching the snow. "Cold, Private?" Mark asked. Sam nodded. "Colder than Vermont winters." Mark chuckled. "You from Vermont?"
"Yeah."
"Miss the trees. Miss the quiet. Even miss my sister yelling at me." There was a long pause. "Think we'll make it, sir?" Sam asked. Mark didn't answer right away. He looked out at the dark hills beyond the village. "We'll try, Sam. That's all we can do." The battle raged into the night, then ceased suddenly, as if both sides had run out of breath. Elena returned from the edge of the forest, limping and bleeding. "They're pulling back. For now," she said through gritted teeth. "How long?" Mark asked. "Hours. Maybe less." He gathered what was left of his unit. Only 10 now.
"Listen," he said.
"Reinforcements will be here by dawn. We just need to hold one more night." Joe Maddox leaned on his rifle. "Then we die with the sun, Lieutenant." Mark shook his head. "We live to see it." The men and women nodded, weary but willing. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. The weight of command, of loss, of fear, pressed down on him. He wrote a letter by candlelight, addressed to no one in particular. "If you find this, know that we fought not for glory, not for medals, but because someone had to stand in the way. Someone had to hold the line. Today, it was us. Tomorrow, it could be you." He tucked the letter into Sam's helmet and placed it by the fireplace. At first light, they came again. This time, the enemy was relentless. Mortars, machine guns, tanks, they brought everything. Elena was hit first. A sniper's bullet caught her between the ribs. She fell without a sound, her eyes staring upward as if trying to memorize the sky. Joe Maddox made it to the tower and held the machine gun until it jammed, then used his sidearm until the bullets ran dry. Mark watched him fall, his last act pulling the pin on a grenade to take down the soldiers storming the stairwell. Mark was alone now. He retreated to the church, wounded in the leg, dragging himself behind the altar. Smoke filled the room. He could hear voices, foreign, angry, getting closer. He closed his eyes, pulled out his pistol, and waited. But the shot never came. Mark woke in a hospital tent. Sunlight poured through the canvas above. His leg was bandaged. Pain pulsed through his body, but he was alive. A nurse approached. "You're lucky," she said. "Reinforcements arrived just in time. Found you under a pile of rubble in the church." Mark tried to speak, but his throat was dry. "Don't talk. Just rest." On the table beside his cot was a metal helmet, Sam's helmet. Inside it was the letter Mark had written and Sam's photo. There was a note taped to it. "We found this in the church. It deserves to be read." Months later, Mark stood in front of a crowd at a military memorial in Washington, D.C. He was no longer a soldier, just a man with a limp and a past too heavy to carry. He stepped up to the podium and read the letter aloud. His voice shook, but he didn't stop. "We fought not for glory, not for medals, but because someone had to stand in the way." The audience was silent. Somewhere in the back, a little girl held her mother's hand and whispered, "Is he a hero?" Her mother knelt beside her and said, "Yes. But so were the ones who didn't come back." The snow still falls in Kresnik. The village was never rebuilt. But if you stand there, among the ruins, you might still hear echoes of voices, of Sam, Elena, Joe, and a young lieutenant who once held the line.